So Chris, thanks so much for coming down to play really quite a historic guitar.
It's a chore, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah. So Gary Moore's 1960 Strat, aka the Red Strat.
Yeah.
Used for a very famous performance of Red House
Yeah.
To celebrate a Fender anniversary. And in a kind of weird way, even though he was very associated with Gibsons, it's an iconic Gary Moore guitar. You know.
Well, that's an iconic performance, isn't it? That's kind of, I looked at it on YouTube the other day just to kind of refresh my memory of it, and not just the millions of views of that's had, but it seems to have transcended the amount of views that it's had just in this sort of legendary performance status. So I remember watching that transfixed as a kid, So yeah, it's a bit surreal to behold, isn't it?
I mean, your roots as a player are in quite sort of aggressive rock players like Slash and so on. Where does Gary Moore stand in that sort of pantheon of players?
Gary was a huge influence. Like I vividly remember one of the few solos that I've ever tried to diligently learn note for note was out in the fields, and that fast run. And conveniently, the music video had this proto GoPro type headstock camera mounted looking up the fretboard, and even with the aid of that I could still not figure out what the hell he was doing. But I remember getting tablature for that and just practicing it and eventually giving up. He was just a monster player, and kind of whether it was the harder 80s stuff or kind of transitioning to kind of later blues stuff, just such a tasteful, aggressive play. You watch him playing, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone sweat so much on stage. He was such a aggressive, I guess, just kind of in the moment guy who kind of gave everything, 110% to every performance. That in itself is just inspiring to watch as a kid, and so many defined eras of Gary's playing, everyone distinct from the latter,
I mean, you don't play Strats so much these days, but you sort of started out with Strats. What do you think as a rock guitar? What do you look for in a good Strat?
I mean, my only kind of barometer or kind of benchmark I have really, I've got a 62 by Total Chance, which I guess aesthetically looks fairly similar to this, save for a couple of dings and bumps. But what always surprises me about Strats is how different they can be. Mine is a July 62, and I played not long after I bought it, played an August 62, which pretty much the only two things, the only thing tying those two guitars together was the name Stratocaster on the headstock. Mine is like a bludgeon. Mine's very kind of aggressive and forthright, and then the one that was a month later was delicate and more stratty, I guess, more typically stratty. This seems to fall into that kind of latter category of being, kind of quite Knopfler-esque, I guess, quite articulate, quite delicate sounding, but still, having a bit more of a kind of strident sort of neck pickup on it, which lends itself to kind of digging in a little bit more. It's it's a great guitar, very cool.
When you were playing just now, I was really struck by, dynamic range is something that Fenders are known for, and we're playing through a Fender Twin as well. But for a moment, I thought you were playing through the bridge pickup, and you're actually just digging in on the neck pickup.
Yeah.
So it's weird how they've got that all within them.
Absolutely. Especially this only having a three-way switch. It's a pretty stiff one, so you can kind of just about jam it in the 2 and 4 there. But yeah, they're such, dynamic is the word. You kind of get so much use out of that kind of volume pot and get so many, shades of grey in between that. It's a beautiful sounding guitar.
Do you want to just walk us through some of the pickup sounds quickly? Because you did some beautiful playing earlier, but it'd be nice to hear them just one after the other.
Neck pickup. Next position, 2 or 4, never quite remember. So we've got the neck and the middle together. The middle position then, on its own. The next even numbered position, 2 or 4, which is going to be the middle and the bridge together. And then, last but not least, we've got the bridge. I've got a feeling this may be in a little bit of need of some TLC. I guess, to give it its due, it's 65 years old and it's been woken up from a decade-long slumber. I'd probably be a little bit cranky as well.
One thing that's we've sort of talked about before with other very special guitars is there's no treble that hurts the ears. You know,
Yeah.
It's kind of weird that happens. Do you think that's a vintage guitar thing, or a guitars that have been played a lot thing? Or?
We're veering into dangerous territory now.
Yeah.
I don't know, honestly. It seems to be, it's kind of like a mellowness, I guess, but still all of those frequencies that you need to, be forthright and cut through. Whether that's a vintage thing, I guess there is something to be said for a guitar having been played to death. I mean, clearly, look at the buckle rash. Listen to the noises. It's just clearly it's a guitar that's been used and loved. And whether or not something molecular happens to a guitar over time, the more it's played, I guess there is something to be said for that. But I'm veering into dangerous territory here, for which you two will undoubtedly crucify me. So. Yeah, I would say, I think it's something that happens over time. There's I guess if nothing else, the magnetic pull of the pickups will probably lessen maybe slightly over the years, at which point you end up with, I hesitate to use the word woody, but it feels like a very, the electric sound of the guitar feels like a very true reflection of its acoustic sound, which is something not necessarily solely or exclusively associated with old guitars in my experience, but it seems to be a higher likelihood of that being the case. So sorry in advance, YouTube.
What were your other impressions of the guitar, like the neck, the sort of weight, that sort of thing?
It's a good weight, actually. It feels very balanced. Again, the only kind of obvious comparison I have is my Strat, which is pretty heavy. But yeah, it feels, very balanced, very, it's a nice weight. It feels very resonant. It's not quiet, it's not overly shouty, it just feels like a very well-balanced, well-played Strat. And,
I mean, Gary obviously played this in, a somewhat heavier context than, like Mark Knopfler or something like that. What do you kind of have to do if you're playing humbucker guitars, might be they Gibsons or whatever, but you also want this to sit alongside them in your set? How have you approached that sort of issue with drives and stuff like that?
I mean, more often than not, it's usually a case of, having a couple of different drives on the board gives you a little bit of flexibility in that respect, so you don't have to be bending down mid-set to try and boost the level to compensate. Also, having a front of house guy who's aware of what's about to happen is helpful there, but I think you can try and compensate to the extent where you actually start stripping guitars of their individual character. A Strat is inherently quieter than a Les Paul is quieter than 335 is different, fundamentally different to a Tele. You know, plugging this in alongside that, that's a big, loud, shouty, aggressive guitar. You know, this feels a little bit more delicate. If you start trying to compensate for that too much with your settings or with your amp or with your attack on the guitar, then it suddenly becomes a little bit homogenized, I guess. So it's nice to just let those characteristics ring.
I mean, it's interesting that you sort of you got the vibe that this is quite one of the more sort of delicate Strats. You know, it's quite sort of, you can hear all that detail when you're playing nice, clean stuff. And it's interesting that Gary sort of chose this one.
Yeah. I guess, you know, opposites attract maybe. Admittedly, it doesn't leap out as the type of Strat that you would necessarily associate with Gary's playing. But that said, Gary was so articulate as a player, you know, and so kind of defined. You know, there was never a misplaced note, there was never a messy note or a kind of slightly slurred or smudged note. It was always super articulate and super erudite, you know, musically erudite. So in that respect, a guitar that echoes that probably makes perfect sense, you know, even if it doesn't necessarily strike you as, oh, that's a Gary sounding guitar. Everything else about it makes perfect sense.
And you're like Gary, you're another guitarist who uses lots of different guitars at various different times.
That's about where the comparisons end as well, unfortunately. But,
yeah. Well, but that's not the case for all guitarists. I mean, Brian May being the ultimate example of just being sort of wedded to one guitar. What do you think the benefit is of having, you know, all of these things in your arsenal? Is it, as a live player, is it something that you just have to kind of adjust to as you're going through a set, or do the benefits clearly outweigh the drawbacks?
Yeah, I think there's a middle ground to be kind of struck there. You know, I've never been particularly musically monogamous. You know, they're tools ultimately, and I've always been fairly pragmatic in my approach to guitars. Different tools do different jobs. You know, if you build in a shed, you're not exclusively going to use one tool from start to bottom. You know, it's you use whatever tool kind of best serves the purpose of what you're trying to express. You know, and that said, I've done shows in the past, you know, kind of tour warm-ups in particular, where you're kind of finding your feet and trying to kind of make the set list fit together, where it's, you know, play a song, guitar off, play the next song, guitar off. That I can find a little bit kind of disjointed or a little bit distracting, because you end up, this inevitably, however accustomed you are to these guitars, however much time you spend with them on or off stage, half of that track that you play with it, especially if it's the first track, is spent kind of acclimatizing, making sure that you're happy, making sure you can hear everything as well as you want to. And if you spend most of the set then kind of feeling like you're getting used to the guitar that you're playing, I think that kind of throws you out of the moment of just trying to be musically expressive or be in the moment of, you know, making music for the people that have paid to come and watch you play. So, I think within reason, it's good to have, you know, different guitars within your arsenal that do fundamentally different jobs. I mean, you know, especially going back and forth between this guitar and that guitar, they're worlds apart, you know, and they do very different jobs. So, you know, as much as it's nice to be wedded to a certain guitar, you know, I guess, like you said, whether that's Brian May, whether it's Rory as well, to a slightly lesser extent, I guess, you know, indelibly associated with that Strat, but still kind of mixing it up here and there. It is nice to have different tools in your arsenal.
And before we come on to that, Telly, just a final thing, which is that, you know, every Strat player tends to have a sort of favourite sound in the Strat. I mean, Richard Thompson likes that bridge and middle together thing. Yeah. What's your favourite sound on this Strat?
Neck is the one that I kind of gravitate towards. There's just there's all the usual kind of cliche terms, I guess, that you would use to describe the sound of a Strat, but there's just a depth to the neck pickup. I mean, if you kind of straight away, that's my kind of little go-to thing for a Strat. The moment I pick it up, neck pickup, and see how it reacts to that, see how it responds. Is there a depth? Is there a clarity? Is there, you know, articulation, which I want in that guitar? It's just the little kind of barometer I have, I guess, to judge a Strat. Neck pickup all day long. You know, I could probably quite comfortably get away, especially with guitars that, you know, are interactive on the volume control. You get away with just a neck pickup on a Strat for an entire gig, I think.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for demonstrating this guitar so beautifully and reminding us of Gary's incredible heritage as a musician.
It's an absolute pleasure to be a part of. Thank you for having me, and sorry, Gary.